Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're going deep on the mystery of sleep.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, why we do it, what happens when we don't, and all the amazing things it does for us. We'll be diving into Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. And get this, two-thirds of adults in developed countries, they're sleep deprived.
Wow.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a recipe for trouble.
It really is. And I knew sleep was important, but I had no idea just how big of an impact it has on, well, everything. But before we get to all the scary stuff, let's start with the basics. Like, why do we even sleep? It seems kind of strange from an evolutionary perspective, right? It makes us super vulnerable for a third of our
You're
lives.
right, it is a bit of an evolutionary puzzle. Scientists were actually baffled by it for a really long time. What we've learned is that sleep, well, it's not just about resting our body.
Oh, so there's more to it.
It's way more than that. It's a time of intense brain activity that's crucial for both our physical and mental well-being. It's like hitting a reset button for our whole system every night.
Okay, so there's a lot more to sleep than meets the eye. Can you unpack that a bit for us? Like, what's actually going on in our brains while we sleep?
Well, one of the key things our brains do during sleep is consolidate memories.
Oh, so it's like storing files.
Exactly. Think of it like transferring files from, say, a USB stick to your computer's hard drive. The book actually describes a study where participants who took a nap after learning a task, well, they performed significantly better than those who didn't nap. That's because during deep sleep, our brains are busy moving information from short-term storage to long-term memory.
So those power naps, those actually do something. I always thought that was a myth. But how does our brain even know when to sleep?
Our bodies operate on a roughly 24-hour cycle called the circadian rhythm. It's basically our internal clock.
Oh, like a built-in schedule.
Right, and it uses cues like daylight to regulate tons of bodily functions, including sleep. As daylight fades, our brains release this hormone called melatonin, which makes us feel sleepy.
That explains why staring at our screens before bed is such a bad idea. All that blue light messes with our melatonin.
Exactly. It's like tricking our brains into thinking it's still daytime. But light isn't the only factor at play here. There's also this chemical called adenosine that builds up in our brains the longer we stay awake.
Ah, so it's like a sleep pressure.
You got it. It's like filling a bathtub. The longer you stay awake, the more the tub fills until you need to drain it by sleeping.
So we've got our internal clock and then this sleep pressure that builds up during the day, but what actually flips the switch from being awake to falling asleep?
It's kind of like a seesaw. On one side, you've got the activating influence of the brainstem, which keeps us awake and alert. And on the other side, you've got that mounting sleep pressure from adenosine and the waning signal from our circadian rhythm as it gets darker.
So eventually the sleep side wins out.
Exactly. The sleep side eventually wins out, and the brainstem's activating influence gets suppressed.
Fascinating. So where does the hypothalamus fit into all of this?
The hypothalamus, well, it acts as the sleep-wake switch. It gets input from both the circadian rhythm and adenosine levels, and it ultimately controls the transition between wakefulness and sleep.
Okay, so we fall asleep, then what? What's going on in our brains while we're actually out? The book mentioned different stages of sleep. What's the deal with those?
Right. Throughout the night, we cycle through these different sleep stages. Each one has its own distinct purpose. There's NREM sleep, which is divided into a few stages, going from light sleep to deep, restorative sleep.
Uh-huh.
And this deep sleep is when our brains are busy consolidating memories and our bodies are working hard to repair themselves.
Ah, so that's why we feel so refreshed after a good night's sleep. It's like a full system reboot. But what about dreaming? Does that happen in any stage of sleep?
Well, dreaming primarily occurs during REM sleep.
REM sleep.
Yeah, it's a fascinating stage where our brain activity actually ramps up, almost to waking levels. Our eyes dart around under our eyelids, and we experience these vivid, sometimes bizarre dreams.
Sounds pretty wild in there. But what's the purpose of all that activity? Why do we even dream?
That's a question scientists are still trying to fully answer. But REM sleep seems to be crucial for things like learning, memory, and emotional processing. It's like our brains are making connections, sorting through experiences, and boosting our creativity.
So we've got these two main types of sleep. Deep sleep for physical repair and memory consolidation, and REM sleep for processing emotions and getting creative. Amazing. But I'm curious, do these sleep stages change throughout our lives? I mean, babies sleep way more than adults.
They do. Sleep needs definitely change as we age. Fetuses, for instance, spend most of their time in REM sleep. It's critical for their brain development and forming those neural connections.
Oh, wow.
And as we get older, the total amount of sleep we need decreases. But both deep sleep and REM sleep remain important throughout our lives.
This brings to mind something I've always wondered about. Teenagers and their, well, seemingly endless need for sleep. Is there a biological reason they're always so tired?
Absolutely. During adolescence, there's a shift in the circadian rhythm, meaning teens naturally feel sleepier later at night and prefer to wake up later in the morning.
I see.
Unfortunately, this often clashes with early school start times, leading to chronic sleep deprivation in teenagers.
So making teenagers wake up early for school is actually working against their natural sleep patterns.
It is, and it can have some serious consequences. Sleep deprivation in adolescence can negatively impact everything from brain development and learning to emotional regulation and physical health.
So letting them sleep in isn't just about them being, well, grumpy teenagers. It's actually crucial for their well-being. That's interesting. I'm sure a lot of parents out there would want to know that. This has all been incredibly insightful, but it seems we've only just scratched the surface of sleep science. There's clearly a lot more to uncover about this essential part of our lives.
You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, most of us are not getting the sleep we need. The consequences of that sleep deprivation, well, they're far reaching, and that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at the dangers from immediate risks to long term health effects.
I have a feeling this is going to be an eye-opening discussion. Listeners, you won't want to miss it. We'll be right back to delve into the alarming world of sleep deprivation. Stay with us.
Welcome back, listeners. I don't know about you, but I'm still thinking about all that stuff we talked about. Sleep is definitely way more important than I ever realized.
I know, right?
But now for the, well, not so fun part. The consequences of not getting enough. This section of the book was honestly kind of scary.
Yeah, it's serious stuff. Even a small amount of sleep loss, it can have a big impact.
Really?
Oh yeah, one of the most, well, immediate and dangerous consequences is something called a microsleep.
What? A microsleep? I've never even heard of that. What is it?
Basically, it's a brief, like, involuntary lapse into sleep. They only last for a few seconds. A few seconds?
Yeah. And they can happen without you even realizing it.
Oh wow.
Like, imagine, nodding off for just a second while you're driving.
Oh gosh. That's terrifying.
It is. And Why We Sleep actually had some pretty alarming statistics about drowsy driving.
Yeah, I think I remember that. What was it again?
Well, the book cited this study where after getting just 4 hours of sleep for 6 nights, people experienced the same number of microsleep as those who had stayed awake for a full 24 hours.
Oh wow.
And get this, by day 11 of this restricted sleep schedule, their performance was like someone who had pulled two all-nighters in a row.
No way. So it's like our brains are slowly shutting down and we don't even know it.
Pretty much.
But even if we're not driving, sleep deprivation, it affects our thinking, right?
Absolutely. It impacts our concentration, decision making, and even our ability to learn. There are studies that have shown a 40% decrease in the ability to learn new information after being sleep deprived.
So like pulling an all-nighter to cram for a test is actually counterproductive.
Yeah, you're much better off getting a good night's sleep and letting your brain, consolidate those memories naturally.
Makes sense. It's not just our thinking that suffers, though, is it? I mean, I know when I'm sleep deprived, I'm way more irritable. Everything makes me mad. Is there a connection there?
Definitely. When we don't get enough sleep, the emotional centers of our brains, like the amygdala, they become overactive. And at the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate emotions, it becomes less effective.
So basically, we're more emotional.
Exactly. It can lead to increased anxiety, more intense emotional responses, and difficulty controlling impulses.
So it's like our brains are stuck in like fight or flight mode,
Pretty much.
which explains why we feel so on edge all the time. And to top it all off, all this stress can't be good for our physical health either.
You're right. Chronic sleep deprivation has, well, detrimental effects on pretty much every system in our bodies.
Like what?
Well, let's start with the cardiovascular system. We're talking about increased risk of heart disease, hypertension, stroke, even heart attacks.
Wow, those are some serious health risks. Didn't the book mention a study that linked shorter sleep to like a 45% higher risk of heart disease?
It did, and what's really concerning is that these risks, they stay high even when you account for other lifestyle factors like smoking or physical activity. Sleep deprivation is a risk factor all on its own.
So it's like we're shaving years off our lives with every hour of sleep we miss. Yikes. And it's not just our hearts. What about our metabolism? I know there's a link between sleep deprivation and weight gain, right?
Right. Sleep loss messes with our hormones. It increases ghrelin, the hormone that stimulates appetite.
Oh no.
And it decreases leptin, the hormone that tells us we're full.
So we're hungrier.
Yes. And you end up eating more and craving unhealthy foods.
Ugh, not a good combination. But it's not just about how much we eat. It's what we're eating too, right? I remember reading that sleep-deprived people tend to crave sugary, high-carb snacks.
Exactly. And when you combine that increased calorie intake with, decreased energy expenditure, because let's face it, when we're tired, we're not exactly hitting the gym.
True.
It creates a perfect storm for weight gain and metabolic disorders like diabetes.
Okay, so we've got heart problems, metabolic issues. What about our immune system? I mean, we all know that sleep is important for fighting off infections. But how exactly does sleep deprivation weaken our defenses?
Well, when you're sleep deprived, your immune response weakens, making you more susceptible to things like colds, flu, and other infections.
Makes sense.
Research has shown that people who consistently get less sleep, they're more likely to get sick after being exposed to a virus.
Oh, really?
And even if you do get vaccinated, sleep deprivation can actually reduce the effectiveness of vaccines.
So our bodies are basically fighting a losing battle when we're sleep deprived.
Pretty much. You're more likely to get sick, and your body's less equipped to fight it off. It's a vicious cycle.
And didn't the book mention a link between sleep loss and cancer as well?
It did. There seems to be a connection between chronic sleep deprivation and an increased risk of several types of cancer, including breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer.
Wow.
This is likely due to a bunch of factors, including impaired DNA repair mechanisms, chronic inflammation, and disruptions in hormone levels.
It's amazing how something as simple as sleep can have such a huge impact on our health.
It really is, and it's important to remember that we're talking about chronic sleep deprivation here, not just, the occasional late night. Consistently getting less than 7 hours of sleep a night over time, it can significantly increase your risk of developing these health problems.
This is definitely a lot to take in. I'm sure our listeners are feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
Yeah.
But thankfully, we have the power to change our sleep habits, and that's what we'll be talking about in the final part of our deep dive. Practical tips for improving sleep in today's, well, busy world.
Sounds good?
Welcome back, listeners. I don't know about you, but after all that talk about sleep deprivation, I'm, well, a little freaked out. But, it's clear we can't just ignore sleep, right?
Right.
It's so important. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about what we can do. What can we actually do to get better sleep, especially in today's, crazy busy world?
That's a great question. And the good news is we actually have more control over our sleep than we think.
Oh, good.
Why we sleep, it offers some really practical advice for, well, reclaiming our sleep.
Okay, that's good to hear. I'm ready. Where do we even begin? I remember the book talked about sleep hygiene. What is that exactly?
Sleep hygiene is all about creating an environment and a routine that tell your body, hey, it's time to wind down.
So, like having a consistent sleep schedule.
Yeah, exactly. Going to bed and waking up around the same time every day, even on weekends, can help regulate your natural sleep-wake cycle.
I've tried that before, and it does seem to help, but there are those nights when I just can't seem to shut my brain off. What about things like caffeine and alcohol? Do those play a role?
Absolutely. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol before bed is key. They can really mess with your sleep.
Yeah, I know alcohol can make you feel sleepy at first, but I always wake up in the middle of the night after I've had a drink.
Right. That's because even though alcohol might help you fall asleep faster, it actually interferes with REM sleep, which is why you often wake up feeling groggy and unrested.
Ah, that makes sense.
And remember how we talked about blue light from our devices and how it suppresses melatonin production?
Yeah.
Limiting screen time before bed, that's super important.
So trading those late night scrolls for a good book is probably a better idea.
Definitely. Reading is a great way to unwind. The book also talks about the importance of creating a sleep-conducive environment.
Uh-huh.
You want it to be cool, dark, and quiet, like you're making a cozy cave for yourself.
Yeah, I love my blackout curtains and keeping my bedroom cool. It really does make a difference. But what about those nights when you just can't stop thinking? Your mind just won't shut off. Any tips for that?
Yeah, for sure. Don't underestimate the power of a comfortable bed and good pillows.
Always important.
And if you're struggling with racing thoughts, relaxation techniques like deep breathing or meditation, those can be really helpful.
It's like creating this calming ritual to signal to your body, okay, it's time to rest now.
Exactly.
But what about people who struggle with actual sleep disorders, like insomnia?
Sleep disorders are more common than people realize. For insomnia specifically, Why We Sleep highlighted the effectiveness of something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI.
CBTI, that sounds interesting. How does that one?
So instead of relying on sleeping pills, which can have side effects and don't really address the root cause of the insomnia, CBTI helps you change your thoughts and behaviors around sleep.
So it's like retraining your brain to associate bedtime with relaxation and sleep instead of, well, stress and anxiety.
You got it. It's about figuring out what's causing your sleep difficulties and then addressing those factors. And of course, for more serious sleep disorders like narcolepsy, it's important to get professional medical help.
Yeah, that makes sense. Getting a proper diagnosis and treatment plan from a sleep specialist is key. And something that really stuck with me from the book was the discussion of sleep in the medical field.
Yeah.
I was shocked to learn that the grueling schedules of medical residents are actually rooted in like cocaine addiction.
I know. It's a wild piece of history, right? And the legacy of William Halsted, it's persisted for way too long. And it's led to exhausted doctors and, unfortunately, preventable medical errors.
It's pretty scary when you think about it. The book made a really strong case for reforming medical training, prioritizing sleep, not just for the doctors, but for the safety of their patients.
Totally.
It seems so obvious.
Right. We need to recognize that sleep deprivation, it impairs judgment and decision making, even in, highly trained professionals. A well-rested doctor is a safer doctor. And this applies to so many other professions, too.
Totally. It's not just about doctors. The book talked about the importance of sleep in everything from education to business.
Absolutely.
If we want to function at our best, we have to prioritize sleep.
Right. Studies show that well-rested students, they perform better, athletes, they achieve peak performance, and employees, they're more productive and creative. Prioritizing sleep, it's not selfish. It's about, unlocking our full potential in everything we do.
Well, this deep dive into why we sleep has been really eye-opening. It's clear that sleep is so much more than just, a passive state of rest.
It is.
It's crucial for our well-being, both physically and mentally, and yeah, even for our success in life.
It really is a fundamental pillar of health, just like diet and exercise. It's time we started treating it that way.
I completely agree. So, as we wrap up this episode, I want to encourage you, our listeners, to think about your own sleep habits. What small changes can you make to prioritize this vital part of your health? Your brain and body will thank you.
Sleep well, listeners.